Good afternoon. Welcome to Prealgebra, Chapter 9, Lesson 3, Multiplying and Dividing Monomials. Today's objectives are to multiply monomials as well as divide monomials. There's no new vocabulary for this lesson, but we do have our first key concept, which is product of powers property. In words, this means to multiply powers with the same base by adding their exponents. We can see it down here represented symbolically, where we have a to the nth power times a to the nth power equals a to the n plus nth power. It's important to note that the common base for both of these is going to be a, and that allows us to just go ahead and combine the exponents. An example of this would be 2 to the 4th power times 2 cubed is going to equal 2 to the 4th plus 3rd powers, or 2 to the 7th power. We're ready to move on to our first example, which is to multiply powers. Since we're focusing on doing a good job of taking notes and making notes that are usable, we are going to make sure to write down that we are multiplying powers. Okay, on to the actual example. They'd like for us to find the product of 3 to the 4th power and 3 to the 6th power. The first thing we need to do is check and make sure that we have the same base. So we look and we see that we have a base of 3 and a base of 3. And this is going to allow us to use the product of powers property. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find the sum of 4 and 6, which is going to be 10, and our final answer is going to be 3 to the 10th power. Let's go ahead and let's look at example 1, part B together. They'd like for us to find the product of 7 to the 8th power and 7. Now, one way that we could take into consideration is that we could think of it as being 7 times 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 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, times 7. Now, as you can tell by looking at this already, this is going to be really cumbersome to do on further numbers. So we would have 7 to the 9th power. But there is a way that we could do it mathematically using that product of powers property that we saw earlier. So here in this situation, we have a common base of 7, and we can always think of 7 as being equal to 7 to the 1st power. So using the 7 to the 1st power, let's try 7 to the 8th times 7 to the 1st is going to equal 7 raised to the 8th plus the 1st. And that's going to give us 7 to the 9th power. So our answer would be 7 to the 9th power. Now, since we're going to be doing a better job taking our notes, let's go ahead and let's put this into a verbal expression. I would add to my notes that any number to the 1st is going to be equal to itself. I would also add that there's a common base of 7, and I would probably also add a note to myself to use the product of powers property. Lastly, I'm going to go ahead and write to add the exponents to find the answer. Now let's go ahead and let's have a chance to try this on our own. We're going to do the quiz questions a little bit different than we've done in other videos. So what I'd like for you to do is please do your work at the end of your notes, and then the answer will be given at the end of the slide. On to the problem. Find the product of 4 to the 3rd power and 4 to the 5th power. You should have found the answer to be 4 to the 8th power. If you got that right, go ahead and give yourself a round of applause. If you didn't, please go ahead and check through your notes and jot down any questions you might have for us tomorrow. Go ahead and try example 1, part B. Find 9 to the 5th power times 9. You should find that the answer is 9 to the 6th power. If not, go ahead and look back at example 1, part B. Now we're going to start example 2, part A, multiply monomials. Please make sure that in your notes you write that we're multiplying monomials. It'll just make things easier when we get to the quiz and the test. Okay, part A. Find the product of y to the 4th and y. the first thing we need to do is we need to check and make sure that we're looking at a common base. So we do have a common base here of y and y. And because it's a common base, we can use the product of powers rule that we learned here at the very beginning. So now we're going to have y to the fourth times y raised to the first. We can add our exponents together, and that is going to give us y to the fifth power. So our final answer is y to the fifth power. Example 2, part B. They'd like for us to find the product of 3p to the fourth and negative 2p raised to the third power. So the first thing we want to do is we want to group the coefficients and the variables. When we group these things together, we're going to have 3 times negative 2, and then our second group will be p to the fourth times p to the third. And we're allowed to do this thanks to the commutative and the associative property of multiplication. Now, once we have things grouped together, we can go ahead and we can start combining like factors. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and combine our like factors of 3 times negative 2, and that'll give us negative 6. And then when we can combine terms in our next set of parentheses, we're going to use our common base of p and the product of powers rule. So we're going to have p to the fourth plus the third. And then we're going to go ahead and do our next step, which will be 6 is going to stay the same. P to the fourth plus the third is going to be p to the seventh. And then when we multiply our two terms together, we're going to go ahead and end up with a final answer of negative 6p to the seventh power. I would make sure to add to my notes where we showed it symbolically that we're going to also use it verbally. So go ahead and write down group coefficients and variables together for our first part. Next, I would add that you're going to multiply the coefficients and then use the product of powers to add the exponents together. Go ahead and try this first quiz question for example 2 by yourself. Find the product of w to the second and w to the fifth power. You should have gotten w to the seventh power. If you didn't, go ahead and review your notes again. Now here's quiz question 2b. Find negative 4m to the third and 6m squared. Go ahead and look back in example 2b's notes for how you're going to do this and then find your solution. And you should have found negative 24m raised to the fifth power, answer B. Now we're on to our last key concept of the lesson, quotient of powers property. In words, you're going to divide powers with the same base by subtracting their exponents. With symbols, you would have a to the mth power divided by a to the nth, and with multiplication, we did addition, and here in division, we're going to use subtraction. So we would have a minus m minus n. And then our example is 3 to the sixth power divided by 3 to the second power can be rewritten as 3 raised to the 6 minus 2 power, and our final answer would be 3 to the fourth power. Here we are at example 3, part A, divide powers. Find 4 to the 11th power divided by 4 to the 5th power. So the first thing we want to do is we want to rewrite our problem. 4 to the 11th power divided by 4 to the 5th power. And using our quotient of powers property, we can write this as 4 to the 11th power minus 5. Then we're going to do our subtraction, and that'll leave us with 4 raised to the 6th power. So our final answer is 4 to the 6th power. Go ahead and write out your notes for the quotient of properties. And for the quotient of powers property, we're going to subtract the exponents. Remember, it's fine to use abbreviations as long as you can remember what they are tomorrow. Here we are at example 3, part B. Find x to the 12th power divided by x. To do this one, we're going to rewrite it as x to the 12th power minus 1. We'll go ahead and subtract the exponents, and that'll give us x to the 11th power. And our final answer then is going to be x to the 11th power. Here's our second to last quiz question for example A. Find 3 to the 12th power divided by 3 to the 4th power. And you should have 3 to the 8th power as your final answer. If you don't, go ahead and check back with example 3, part A. Here's your second to last quiz question for the day. Find r to the 4th power divided by r to the 1st power. You should have gotten answer C, r to the 3rd power. If not, please write down any questions you might have, and we can talk about them tomorrow. On to our last example for the day, example 4, real world. We're going to be looking at clouds. The table shows the approximate heights of some clouds. About how many times higher are some high clouds than some low clouds? Now, one thing that we want to keep in mind is this expression, about how many times higher. Anytime that we see that expression, we're going to be writing a division expression. Now, if it were to say something is so many times larger, then you would use multiplication. But how many times higher is going to require a division expression. I would go ahead, and if you don't have that written down in your notes, go ahead and add that now. Okay, on to solving our problem. Let's take 2 to the 13th divided by 2 to the 10th. We're going to use our quotient of powers of property, a rule that we learned earlier, and do 2 to the 13th minus 10, which is going to give us 2 to the 3rd. Now, we're not quite done there. We actually need to go ahead and simplify because 2 to the 3rd is also equal to 2 times 2 times 2, which is equal to 8. So our final answer is that the high clouds are 8 times higher. Go ahead and take a few seconds to write down what we did in this work as well. So we used the quotient power of properties to subtract exponents here in this first step, and then we went ahead and we simplified. That's going to be something rather important to write down. Simplify your answer. Here's your last quiz question for the day, your own chance to try a real-world example. The table shows the approximate heights of some clouds. About how many times higher are some high clouds than some low clouds? Here's your last quiz question of the day and your own chance to try out a real-world example. Clouds. The table shows the approximate heights of some clouds. About how many times higher are some high clouds than some middle clouds? So remember, we need to look here and remember about how many times higher. And we're also going to be looking at high clouds compared to middle clouds. Go ahead and get started. Remember, it's not enough just to show your answer, we also need to see your work. And your final answer should be B, 4 times. If you got that right, give yourself a round of applause. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Peace and God bless.